It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the lying. It was the realization that I allowed it. Nice people don't break loudly. They fade slowly. I used to believe being kind made me strong. I used to believe patience was power. I used to believe people would eventually understand. They understood. They just didn't care. You know what hurts? It's not being used. It's knowing you saw the signs and still stayed soft. I smiled through disrespect. I excused coldness. I told myself they were just having a bad day. I told myself loyalty meant endurance. I kept explaining their behavior to myself. I kept shrinking to fit their comfort. I kept offering warmth to people who only brought frost. And they noticed. They noticed I wouldn't snap. They noticed I wouldn't leave. They noticed I would stay. Staying feels noble until you realize you were the only one fighting to keep it alive. I wasn't naive. I was hopeful. Hopeful people bleed quietly. Nice people get used until they turn cold. And when they turn cold, no one remembers who froze them. No one remembers the nights they stayed silent. No one remembers the weight they carried alone. They only remember the distance. They only remember the silence. They only remember the cold. But cold is not cruelty. Cold is protection. Cold is what happens when warmth is taken for granted too many times. And I learned not to break loudly, but to disappear. You think the cold came from anger. It didn't. It came from exhaustion. There's a specific kind of tired. Not the kind that sleep fixes. Not the kind that fades with a weekend. But the kind that builds when you keep giving and nothing comes back. I kept showing up. I kept understanding. I kept forgiving things that shouldn't have needed forgiveness. And every time I chose patience, I taught them I would tolerate it. Every time I stayed silent, I trained them to speak carelessly. That's the part no one talks about. Nice people don't explode. They absorb. Absorb the tone. Absorb the disrespect. Absorb the imbalance. Until there's no space left. And when there's no space left, something changes. You don't become cruel. You become distant. Distance is not revenge. Distance is survival. Distance is clarity. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my intentions. I stopped giving second chances to people who treated first chances like discounts. And that's when they noticed. Not when I was hurting. Not when I was shrinking. When I stopped giving. Funny how absence is louder than pain. They called me cold. They called me changed. They called me different. No, I was consistent. They were comfortable. You want the truth? I warned them. Not with threats, with effort. Effort is a warning. Silence is a warning. Withdrawal is the final one. Nice people get used because they believe empathy will be mirrored. They assume loyalty is mutual. They assume kindness is respected. It isn't. Not automatically. I didn't become cold because I wanted to. I became cold because warmth was wasted. And when warmth is wasted long enough, it turns into boundaries. Boundaries feel like ice to people who only knew your fire. So when they say, "You've changed," what they really mean is, you stopped letting me take from you. And that is not cruelty. That is growth. Growth is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be understood. It just withdraws from what drains it. You know what I realized? I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself. Angry for tolerating what I would never have accepted for someone I loved. That's the part that cuts. Not betrayal, self-betrayal. I kept adjusting my standards. I kept bending my boundaries. I kept convincing myself that understanding meant endurance. But endurance without reciprocity is erosion. It wears you down, grain by grain. And no one notices erosion at first. It looks like patience. It sounds like kindness. It feels like loyalty. Until one day, there's nothing left to give. That's when the cold arrives. Not dramatic, just absence. I stopped reaching out first. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped trying to fix what I didn't break. And suddenly, I was different. Different? No. I was balanced for the first time. Nice people get used because they believe effort will inspire effort, because they assume depth will be matched with depth. But not everyone values depth. Some value convenience, and kindness is convenient. They didn't hate my kindness, they relied on it. They leaned on it until it bent. And when it straightened, they called it cold. Cold isn't hatred. Cold isn't revenge. Cold is the temperature of self-respect. I didn't stop caring. I stopped over-caring. I stopped bleeding for rooms that wouldn't even bruise for me. That shift, it's painful. Because you lose the version of yourself that tolerated everything, and you don't get applause for that loss. You get distance. You get misunderstanding. You get silence. But you also get peace. And peace is heavier than approval. So when they say, "You've changed," I nod. Because I did, and I should have sooner. I should have changed sooner. Not because they deserved it, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved balance. I kept telling myself that loyalty meant staying, that understanding meant absorbing, that strength meant silence, and silence became my prison. Do you know what it feels like to watch yourself shrink in real time? To watch your standards lower just to keep someone comfortable? To convince yourself it's maturity when it's really fear. Fear of losing them, fear of conflict, fear of being alone, fear disguised as patience. I wasn't cold back then. I was available, always available. And availability without boundaries turns into expectation. Expectation without gratitude turns into entitlement. They didn't see a person. They saw reliability. They saw tolerance. And I let them. That's the truth. Nice people get used, not because they're weak, but because they believe everyone thinks like they do. They assume effort will be returned. They assume honesty will be respected. They assume love is mutual. It isn't always. And when you finally stop overgiving, when you finally stop excusing disrespect, when you finally stop negotiating your own value, they call you cold. Cold. As if warmth is mandatory. As if self-preservation is cruelty. Cold is what remains when illusion melts. I didn't stop caring. I stopped chasing. I stopped trying to prove loyalty to people who never questioned theirs. There's a difference between being kind and being compliant. I confused the two. I blurred the line, and the line blurred me. You want to know when it shifted? When I realized my patience wasn't inspiring growth, it was enabling stagnation. That realization hurts more than betrayal. Because betrayal is external. Self-betrayal is internal. Every time I stayed silent, every time I chose peace over principle, every time I swallowed discomfort instead of addressing it, and eventually, something hardens. Not your heart, your standards. You stop explaining. You stop overextending. You stop being endlessly available. You become selective. Selective kindness feels like coldness to those who benefited from your excess. And that's fine. Because warmth without boundaries burns you. Cold with clarity protects you. I learned something simple. If I wouldn't accept it from a stranger, I shouldn't accept it from someone I care about. Loyalty is not blindness. Patience is not passivity. Kindness is not self-erasure. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Nice people get used until they turn cold. But the cold, it's not hatred. It's self-respect finally arriving. I should have sooner. Not to punish them, not to prove a point, but to stop proving mine. You see, when you're the nice one, you become predictable. You become the safe place. You become the one who absorbs the storm. And storms don't apologize. They just return again and again. I thought consistency would earn respect. I thought loyalty would inspire loyalty. I thought staying meant strength. Staying without standards is surrender. And surrender feels noble until it empties you. There's a specific silence that follows exhaustion. Not loud, not dramatic, just distant. You stop explaining your pain. You stop asking to be understood. You stop expecting reciprocity. You detach. And detachment feels cold, but it's calculated. I calculated how many times I excused them, how many times I swallowed words, how many times I minimized myself to keep peace. Peace built on imbalance isn't peace. It's tension delayed. And delayed tension becomes resentment. Resentment becomes distance. Distance becomes cold. Nice people get used because they overestimate empathy. They project their conscience onto others. They assume fairness is automatic. It's not. Fairness is enforced. Respect is defined. Boundaries are spoken. I didn't speak mine. I hoped they'd notice. Hope is not communication. So I learned. Not through revenge, through withdrawal. I stopped overgiving. I stopped chasing balance. I let the imbalance expose itself. That's when everything became clear. Not loud, just undeniable. The cold version of me, he isn't cruel. He's precise. He measures effort before investing. He doesn't stay where he's tolerated. He doesn't beg to be valued. He doesn't trade self-respect for belonging. And yes, that makes rooms uncomfortable. Because when you stop bending, people feel the shift. They call it arrogance. They call it distance. They call it change. It's alignment. Alignment with what I deserve. Alignment with what I tolerate. Alignment with the truth I ignored. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. I just no longer offer warmth where it freezes. And that is the part that scares them. Because warmth is easy to love. Boundaries are not. Nice people get used until they turn cold. And when they turn cold, they finally stop losing themselves. They think the cold is sudden. They think it's dramatic. They think it's emotional. It isn't. Cold is calculated. Cold is measured. Cold is what remains when illusion finally dies. I didn't wake up different. I accumulated clarity, that's all. I replayed conversations. I remembered patterns. I counted the times I swallowed discomfort to keep harmony. Harmony built on imbalance is fragile. It requires one person to stay small. And I stayed small for too long. I thought silence was maturity. I thought restraint was wisdom. I thought overgiving proved depth. Depth doesn't mean self-erasure. It means awareness. Awareness hurts. Because once you see the pattern, You can't pretend you don't. I saw how effort wasn't mirrored. I saw how boundaries were tested. I saw how kindness was expected but never reciprocated. And I kept adjusting. I kept rationalizing. I kept excusing behavior I would never tolerate from myself. That's when the fracture starts. Not between you and them, between you and yourself. Self-betrayal is subtle. It whispers. It tells you to endure just a little more, and little more becomes too much. I wasn't being strong. I was being afraid. Afraid to disrupt the comfort of others, and comfort is expensive. It costs self-respect. When I finally stopped over-explaining, when I stopped volunteering my warmth, when I stopped initiating repair for things I didn't damage, something shifted. Not in anger, in posture. My voice lowered, my responses shortened, my tolerance tightened. That's when they felt the cold, because I wasn't predictable anymore. I wasn't endlessly accessible. Nice people get used because they're consistent, and consistency without limits invites exploitation. They didn't lose a kind person. They lost unlimited access. And access is what they valued, not the person. Cold isn't hatred. Cold is controlled distance. Distance that protects dignity. I don't regret being kind. I regret being careless with my own boundaries. There's a difference. Kindness without awareness drains you. Patience without limits weakens you. Loyalty without reciprocity erodes you. I didn't become heartless. I became selective. Selective with energy. Selective with time. Selective with trust. And yes, it feels lonely sometimes because fewer people can access you. But it feels stable. Stability is quiet. Stability doesn't beg to be liked. I stopped shrinking. I stopped softening truths. I stopped trading discomfort for false peace. And when they say, "You've changed," they're right. I did. I chose self-respect over approval. I chose boundaries over belonging. I chose alignment over illusion. And the cold they feel, that's not cruelty. It's consequence. Nice people get used until they turn cold. And when they turn cold, they finally stop losing themselves. The strangest part? I don't hate them. I don't even blame them fully. I blame the version of me that thought love required self-erasure. I thought if I was patient enough, gentle enough, understanding enough, things would balance themselves. Balance doesn't arrive. It's enforced. And I never enforced it. I kept waiting for awareness. I kept assuming fairness would wake up on its own. That assumption cost me. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily. It cost me energy. It cost me clarity. It cost me sleep. You don't notice the loss at first. You just feel heavier, less sharp. You start second-guessing yourself. You start minimizing your own reactions. You start telling yourself you're overreacting, even when you're not reacting at all. That's how erosion works. It convinces you the damage is imaginary. It makes you doubt your own perception. I doubted mine, repeatedly. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe this is normal. That word, normal, nearly destroyed me. Normal is often just tolerated dysfunction, repeated long enough to feel familiar. And familiarity is dangerous because you stop questioning it. You adapt to what should have been addressed. I adapted. I became flexible. Too flexible. Flexibility is strength until it bends you out of shape, until you don't recognize yourself anymore. That's when the cold begins, not as anger, as awareness. Awareness that effort was uneven. Awareness that respect was conditional. Awareness that kindness was convenient. And once you see convenience for what it is, you stop offering it freely. That shift feels ruthless to them. It feels unfair. It feels like betrayal. But it's not betrayal. It's correction. Correction doesn't apologize. It recalibrates. I recalibrated. I measured effort before investing. I watched actions instead of words. I stopped assuming intention. That's when they felt distance, because distance reveals imbalance. I no longer filled silence. I no longer initiated repair. I no longer absorbed tension. And something strange happened. I felt lighter. Not happier, not softer, lighter. Because the weight wasn't love. It was overextension. You can't carry everyone. You can't compensate for someone else's effort. You can't sustain imbalance indefinitely. So the cold isn't revenge. It's sustainability. Sustainable boundaries. Sustainable energy. Sustainable dignity. And when they say, "You're not the same," they're right. I'm not. I'm not endlessly patient. I'm not infinitely available. I'm not willing to disappear for comfort. Nice people get used until they turn cold. And when they turn cold, they finally become precise. Precise with time. Precise with trust. Precise with love. And precision is not cruelty. It's survival. Survival changes your posture. You stop leaning forward. You stop offering before being asked. You stop filling gaps that aren't yours to fill. You stand still. And stillness unsettles people who benefited from your movement. Because when you stop compensating, imbalance becomes visible. They weren't used to silence from you. They weren't used to limits. They weren't used to hearing no without apology. That's when they say you've changed, as if evolution is betrayal, as if growth is aggression. But growth isn't loud, it's selective. I stopped volunteering explanations. I stopped rehearsing justifications. I stopped asking to be understood. Understanding is a privilege, not an entitlement, and I was giving it away. I was translating disrespect into excuses. I was rewriting negligence into stress. I was softening indifference into they didn't mean it. Meaning doesn't erase impact. Intent doesn't erase pattern. Patterns tell the truth, even when words don't.